So, who actually decides what you see when you check the news? For, decades, the answer was pretty simple. It was an editor. But today, the whole game has changed. The gatekeepers of information are, well, they're different. So who's in charge now? Is it a journalist, a lawyer, or is it an algorithm? Let's find out.
Here's what we're going to dig into. We'll start in the classic newsroom to really get a feel for a journalist's core mission. Then we'll see how that mission gets put to the test in a crisis and how it's shaped by the law. And finally, we're going to meet the most powerful new editor on the planet, the algorithm. And hopefully we can start to answer that huge question. Who really decides what's news anymore?
All right, first up, let's take a step back in time. Because to understand where we are now, you've got to see how the news used to get made. The traditional press was always seen as this check on power, right? An institution so vital to democracy it was called the Fourth Estate, standing right there alongside the three branches of government, keeping them honest.
For generations, this quote was just reality. Picture it, a smoky room filled with experienced editors, all debating, sometimes shouting, and finally deciding what you were going to read on the front page. This was never about what was popular or what would get the most clicks. It was about what was important. Their entire process was guided by journalistic ethics and the shared sense of what society needed to know. It was all about people deciding what mattered.
And this whole idea is driven by something called the social responsibility theory. You can think of it as this middle path between total government censorship on one side and a complete media free-for-all on the other. The theory basically says that the press has a fundamental duty to the public, not just to spit out facts, but to give context, to interpret what's going on, and to be held accountable for serving the common good.
And wow, when you put them side by side, the difference is huge. Over on the left, you have the old-school libertarian theory, which is just the press can do whatever it wants, no strings attached. But that idea is pretty much seen as outdated now. Instead, most of the industry really aims for the model on the right, social responsibility. You get all that powerful freedom, but it's balanced with a really deep sense of duty to society.
Okay, but what happens to that noble mission when everything hits the fan? When a major crisis like a pandemic strikes, a journalist's role gets put to the ultimate test. And you know what? It often has to change, big time.
So we usually think of journalists as watchdogs, right? Barking at the government, holding power accountable. But during a massive crisis, two other roles can suddenly become way more important. They can become a public mobilizer, basically helping people stay safe, and even a cooperative partner, working alongside authorities just to get critical, life-saving information out to everyone.
It's a really fundamental shift. It becomes all about service. The number one goal is no longer about uncovering the next big scandal. It's about giving the public clear, simple, actionable advice on how to protect themselves and their families. The mission literally shifts from critique to direct public service.
And in a crisis, not all reporters are playing the same game. You've got your specialist reporters, the health and science folks, who often become that sober voice of reason, calmly putting risks into perspective. But then you have your general reporters, and they might focus more on the human drama of it all, and on spreading those absolutely crucial how-to-act messages from officials. Both roles are vital for sure, but they're serving very different functions.
Okay, so we've got the journalist's mission, and we see how it can bend and change. But what are the rules of the road? Let's take a look at the legal guardrails that shape what reporters can and cannot publish.
What you're seeing here is basically the story of how the Supreme Court carefully built a legal shield for the press. It started back in 1964, when they set a really high bar for public figures who want to sue for libel. To win their case, they have to prove something called actual malice. And let me tell you, this was a total game changer. It gave journalists the breathing room to report aggressively on powerful people without constantly fearing they'd be sued into silence.
And this right here is the key phrase, actual malice. It's super important to know it doesn't just mean the journalist was being mean or had a grudge. It means they published something they knew was false, or they had really serious doubts about whether it was true and just published it anyway. It is a very tough standard to meet, and it's basically the legal backbone that allows real investigative journalism to exist in the United States.
And now, for the great disruption. We are leaving the newsroom, we're leaving the courtroom, and we're heading straight to Silicon Valley, because a powerful new gatekeeper has just taken a seat at the head of the table.
This quote, which was reportedly said by Mark Zuckerberg, is jarring, but it perfectly captures the new philosophy. See, the old definition of what's newsworthy was based on public significance. The new definition? It's all about personal relevance. an algorithm's best guess about what will grab your attention right now. It taps into a pretty basic human wiring. We care about what's close to home. The problem is, a functioning society often depends on us having a shared understanding of big things happening far away. And this changes absolutely everything, right down to who's even making the call. Instead of an editor who's been trained in journalistic ethics, you have a software engineer who's been trained to optimize for engagement. The algorithm is tracking every click, every share, every second you linger on a photo, all to predict what will keep you scrolling. The goal isn't to tell you what's important anymore, it's to guess what will make you click.
So here's how it works now. Journalists, they still write the stories, but they don't control that final crucial step, distribution. The story gets fed into a platform, an algorithm analyzes it and analyzes you, and then it decides if that story ever even shows up in your feed. The final editor is a piece of code.
And when you put these two worlds right next to each other, the contrast is just stark. On one side, you have a process that's rooted in human judgment and a sense of public duty. And on the other, you have a mathematical formula that's designed to predict and exploit your behavior. The very definition of what news even is has been completely rewritten.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. We've got the traditional press, we've got the law, and now we have this incredibly powerful new gatekeeper. So, what does it all mean for how we see the world?
Which brings us right back to our big question. Who is it? The reporter, the lawyer, the coder? Well, the truth is, it's messy. They all now play a part in this super complex and often conflicting system. This table really lays out the core conflict. The primary goal of the press is to inform the public. The primary goal of a platform is to maximize user engagement. For a journalist, news is defined by its public significance. For an algorithm, news is defined by your predicted personal interest. Accountability for the press comes from ethics in the law. For platforms, it comes from their own internal corporate policies. Their loyalties just point in completely different directions.
And look, it's really important to remember, this wasn't some grand conspiracy. The people who built these platforms didn't set out to become the world's most powerful editors. As this quote suggests, they were focused on an engineering problem, and this massive takeover of the news ecosystem was, in many ways, an unintended and maybe even alarming consequence of their success.
And so this is the question we're all left with. A system that's designed to give us exactly what we want is incredibly powerful. But democracy, and just a healthy society, sometimes depends on us seeing things that are uncomfortable, or complex, or not immediately relevant to our day-to-day lives. So if the algorithm only ever shows us what we want to see, what happens to all the important stories we aren't already looking for? That's the challenge for all of us in this new age of information.